Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome everyone into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Everyone, welcome into the program. I hope that you're doing well, you had a great week, and you are ready for, well, Ralph Bond. He is our science and tech trends correspondent, and we have a lot of great stories for you. Everything, hopefully that makes you feel upbeat, happy, excited. And, ladies and gentlemen, there are some big headlines going on. Obviously, everything happening in Ukraine and everything happening around the world. But that doesn't mean other things can't happen. And, there's always a sentiment that, there's only so much time, there's only 24 hours in a day, and a headline has to captivate those 24 hours at some point. There's so little bandwidth for everything else happening in the world with, I don't know if it's the way that it's designed or just that's what people really want to hear about. But ladies and gentlemen, we think you want to hear about this as well. A lot of very fun stories that Ralph gathers for us every single week, and we'll be talking about those here in just a moment. But before we do, computeramerica.com, that's where you'll find all these stories and more. Of course, you'll find it underneath the Ralph Bond section. It's going to be all of his shows, past show notes, past video archives, all there in one place. And of course, you can find them wherever you hear podcasts, and of course on YouTube, as well as his website. We'll have a link to that as well. With that being said, computeramerica.com, that's really all you need to remember if you're busy, if your hands are tied. With that being said, I think we just bring Ralph on and have a fun show. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I said before, science and tech trends correspondent, longtime contributor to Computer America, and hey, Ralph, welcome back onto the program. How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be back, and happy Friday. And as you very well laid it out, what we're going to do with today's show and every Friday, leave you feeling good, not bad, because you can get all the bad news you want many, many places. That's happening all the time, terrible tragedies and all that. No. We're going to talk about great things in robotics, medical technology, sustainable energy technology, transportation advances, space research, physics. You name it. Ben and I, every Friday, come up with great stories, share them with you, and leave you feeling good. And in the subject of sharing, come out to computeramerica.com, get the show notes, because the show notes will have the script, if you want to call it that, the extractions from the articles that I'm going to report on, the sources, the links, pictures, sometimes links to videos, all this good stuff. Because what we do, or what I do, is I go out and I look for these stories and I extract the highlights from each article. It's not the complete article, of course. So if you want to dive deeper in any story, come out to computeramerica.com, get the show notes, and away we go.
Absolutely. And with that, for those who will follow along by the time that they hear this, story number one has to do with a very, very ambitious project to bring green energy. And that's we've heard a lot of headlines and a lot of news, Ralph, over the past couple of months and the past year or two, and I'm sure COVID accelerated to some extent, that green energy is by far, and this is kind of the hopeful part, is by far the leader in new energy creation. Not saying that we're completely off gas and coal and stuff like that, but when it comes to what people are investing in the future, they're already buying wind and solar in greater quantities than they are in gas and other things like that, Ralph. So, but we're not there yet, and projects like story number one might help us get there a little bit faster, even if they seem Star Trek-esque, very science fiction-y.
Yes, that's true. So that's a great build-up for the first story here, which is related to story two as well, and I'll explain in a moment. But the headline here is Japan aims to beam solar power from space by 2025. So in this case, we're not talking about 10 years, 20 years. No, 2025. Pick this story up from Yahoo Finance, a story by Anthony Cuthbertson. We've got the pictures and the links and so forth on the show notes, and even a video as well. But I want to set the stage here that this news story and story 2 are focused on the international race to tap the sun's energy in space and transmit it to Earth. Now, story 1, our first story here, looks at Japan's efforts and programs, mentions programs happening in Europe. And then story 2 looks at 2 efforts in play here in the United States. So it's truly a very international thing that's really happening. It's a great trend we all have to be aware of and watch, because it could be an amazing additional part of the constellation of green energy solutions that are at play now in our world. So let's get into this first story. Japan is aiming to become the first country in the world to beam solar energy back from space, back to Earth to generate electricity at scale. And Ben, the key word in that sentence is at scale. So their ambition is not just to show it's possible, like an experiment, but to go beyond just experiment to having something that's functioning at scale, meaning it's practical, it's affordable, and it's deployable. So that's what the at scale and is a key word you hear in the green energy community a lot. So a public-private partnership led by Japanese space agency JAXA will see the first satellite transmitters set up by 2025, according to local reports. Now, here's how this is going to work. The satellites will convert solar power into microwaves and send them to ground-based receiving stations, which then convert the microwaves into electrical energy. The concept, and this is amazing to me, Ben, get this, the concept, which was first theorized in 1968, has several advantages over terrestrial solar power setups, notably being able to harvest solar energy for much longer, unhindered by the sun's typical cycle. So when you have the collector in orbit in space, it's not going to have the barriers, as it were, of solar collectors on the surface of the Earth.
The atmosphere that kind of keeps us happy and healthy also does a lot to filter out the power of the sun. It makes sense.
That's right. And it kind of thematically relates to the next line here in the article. And microwaves are capable of passing through clouds. So the technology is also able to operate in adverse weather conditions. Doesn't care. Isn't that something? Japan has already achieved several firsts in the field, having been the first to transmit power via microwaves in space in the 1980s. What? And then more recently, in 2015, Japanese space agency scientists beamed 1.8 kilowatts of power down to an Earth-based receiver, roughly enough power to run an electric kettle. These are the electric kettles for making tea.
The UK is very excited by that line. Yes.
Yes, kettles are important to those people.
But I do want to say real quick that, when I think about Japan, I know that they were a manufacturing powerhouse. They were, as far as like high technology goes, Japan was, very, very advanced in that department. I never really think of Japan though, Ralph, and like their space efforts. It's not my first thinking of Japan, but I guess they've been working a lot with space. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny. It makes me think of that Netflix movie that got so much press called Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio. And the whole premise of the story is the Americans, the NASA bunch, working with their space agency colleagues in Japan. So there's this, it really made me kind of think more about their space program. Very advanced, very serious, very, great scientific work going on there.
Yes.
So now the article then kind of shifts gears and says, there are other people, doing this, and they talk about the European Space Agency. So they say several other countries and regions are also working on the technology, with the European Space Agency, unveiling a plan last year to test the viability of space-based solar power. The Solaris program is what they call it, aims to make Europe a global leader in this untapped energy resource, with the hope of setting up a development program. Again, here we go, in 2025. Folks, this is coming. This is coming. I love it. More research. Now, here's kind of a reality check, okay? More research still needs to be done before it becomes feasible feasible, pardon me, at a significant scale. That's that at scale part. Now, the Japanese think they're going to be able to pull that off in 2025. These guys are saying, there's still some work to be done. We'll see who gets this. Although recent advances in high efficiency solar cells, wireless power transmission, and robotic in-orbit assembly of the satellites with the microwave, right, make the prospect viable, they think. And of course, China, no surprise, and the U.S. are also working on ways to tap the sun's energy from space. Now, another reality check that I thought was very helpful in the article. All wonderful, all sounds very promising, but there are some concerns surrounding the technology that include health impacts of low power microwaves on humans, animals, and plants. But I have to believe that all of these amazing scientists across the globe are taking that into consideration and are going to figure out a way to minimize or eliminate that threat.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it goes to show that scientists want to make sure that they have every angle kind of thought about. But I mean, Ralph, I'm curious to how much damage that kind of radiation, or I say radiation, the microwaves can do.
Right.
But it's like, the sun that everyone goes out. In fact, some people are crazy enough to just go out there and lay in the sun on purpose. That gives a huge dose of, kind of dangers and stuff like that. I'm having a hard time to think that, what this technology can do would be much different than what the sun does naturally and what we're all kind of used to. So fingers crossed that, the adverse health effects are minimal at best. So
yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
So we'll see. But still, I could imagine that, obviously space, there's a lot more space than there is land. To be able to harness the power of the sun from space, beam it down onto a very tiny little surface, you would disrupt a lot less, kind of usable land. And hey, maybe even get those solar farms in places closer to where you need the energy. It's very encouraging that not just Japan, as the story kind of started out with, but all countries with any kind of viable space program are looking into this as well. So, hey, fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed. And again, as I said before, the way I look at this whole green energy environment, Ben, and you and I have been talking about this for years, you've got, of course, wind and solar. Most people immediately think of that. But then there's hydrogen. That's a monstrous trend looming and building steam, so to speak. And now you add this space-based microwave transmission to generate energy. It just adds. I don't think there's any one thing that's going to solve the problem and suddenly make everything else obsolete. No, I think it's a combination of things. And I guess if you're in the fossil fuel business, you should be a little bit worried, but we'll see.
well, I'm honestly surprised that with as much as much bad press as fossil fuels get, I'm surprised that they still have kind of job security for the next 20, 30, 40 years. But of course, after 20, 30, 40 years, and maybe even before that, hopefully, they won't. And that's going to benefit everyone. We don't have to worry about a few jobs if, we have to keep up all the solar and wind and hydro and all that other kind of power. Right. So very cool. Right. Story number one. Story number two, like you said before at the get-go, follows in the same vein as story number one. So let's talk about the U.S. in all this.
Yeah. So as I was researching this story that we just finished from Yahoo Finance, I got interested in this and started looking around for other related things, especially for the United States. And so story two is kind of an aggregate of two articles. It's two efforts in the United States to capture solar energy in space and transmit it to Earth. So first up, scientists at Caltech claim they're the first to transmit space-based solar power to Earth. So there's a little bit of an interesting thing here going on because, you have the Japanese and now you have Caltech. I'm not going to get into who's really first or not, but this is a story from Engadget.com, a story by Dana Wollman. Really interesting story. We've got the news release from Caltech that's in the show notes, the link there for that, and a couple of videos as well. So, a lot of rich material to back this up. So here's the story. A team of researchers from Caltech announced on the 1st of June that their space-borne prototype called the Space Solar Power Demonstrator had collected sunlight, converted it into electricity, and beamed it to microwave receivers installed on a rooftop at Caltech's Pasadena, California campus. Well, this sounds, and I inserted a little comment of my own. It seems so much like what the Japanese are doing. So I'm not sure why they're saying they're the first, but I'll leave that as it is. The experiment also proves that the setup, which launched on January the 3rd, is capable of surviving the trip to space, along with the harsh environment of space itself. And then there's a quote here from one of the lead researchers, quote, "To the best of our knowledge, no one has ever demonstrated wireless energy transfer in space, even with expensive, rigid structures. We're doing it with flexible, lightweight structures and with our own integrated circuits. This is a first," said Ali Hamaj-Miri, I'm butchering this poor man's name, professor of electrical engineering and medical engineering and co-director of Caltech Space Solar Power Project, which was founded back in 2011. Again, based on the Japanese story we just did, it's like, okay, there must be some nuanced qualifier that makes them the first in a different way than the Japanese. I don't know.
And if I'm, kind of reading this right, this is back in 2015. They were able to do it, to power the kettle. But the first that, from what I read from the article that you linked, they want to be the first country to do it at scale. So I think you have to take that whole block together. They may not have been the first to prove it was possible, but they want to be the first to do it at scale, and that's the qualifier, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so I love this topic. It's a great trend. Talk about trends, correspondent, right? I'm going to be watching this one anyway. So the experiment at Caltech, known in full as Microwave Array for Power Transfer Low Orbit Experiment, which of course becomes the acronym MAPLE. So again, that's Microwave Array for Power Transfer Low Orbit Experiment, aka MAPLE, is one of 3 research projects being carried out aboard the Space Solar Power Demonstrator. And the effort involved 2 separate receiver arrays and lightweight microwave transmitters with custom chips, according to Caltech. In their press release, the team added that the transmission setup was designed to minimize the amount of fuel needed to send them to space, and that the design also needed to be flexible enough so that the transmitters could be folded up into a rocket. And this goes back to that whole bit about one of the things that you need to make all of this possible and practical is the ability to autonomously and robotically assemble these arrays once they're in orbit, right? So that's what they're referring to here. So pretty cool stuff from Caltech. But now let's talk about a related thing. Not quite the same thing, but very much related. So a second USA-based effort, University of Pennsylvania. Solar panel breakthrough paves way for utility scale, at scale, space farms. Yes. And I just caught this story very, very recently. This comes from The Independent, a story by Anthony Cuthbertson. And there's the link here. And here we go. The next generation solar panels, built by a team from the University of Pennsylvania, uses layers that are over 1,000 times thinner than a human hair, yet capable of absorbing a comparable amount of sunlight to commercially available solar cells. Wow. The extreme thinness earned them the label two-dimensional, as they're only a few atoms thick. What? The ability to produce more electricity per weight compared to traditional silicon solar cells makes them highly suitable for sending into space to harvest the sun's energy, according to the researchers. Hey, there's the key. It's another, key in this whole equation to make this possible, right? And the number of silicon solar cells you would have to ship up into space is so large that no space vehicles currently can take those kinds of materials up there in an economically viable way, says Deep Jariwala from the University of Pennsylvania. Now, so by modeling the innovative solar cell computationally, computer design, of course, the team was able to come up with a design that has double the efficiency compared to what had previously been demonstrated. And the weight of 2D solar cells, I love this, get this, the weight of these new 2D, only a few atoms thick, solar cells is 100 times less than silicon are gallium arsenide solar cells. So suddenly these cells become a very appealing technology for this purpose of launching solar capture into space.
Yeah.
So, wow, great stuff going on. Really cool.
A lot of metamaterial science, I'm sure, goes into that as well. And while you were doing that story, I was kind of reading more up on the 2015 experiment and stuff like that. And I gotta say, I just looked up the 2015. I think where this, kind of gets messed up is, no offense to the fine people of Yahoo Finance. I think Yahoo is, still a decently good publication. But I think when they said in 2015, JAXA scientists followed this up with another breakthrough that saw 1.8 kilowatts of power beamed down to an Earth-based receiver, Ralph, which, obviously you have to take the author, for what they wrote. But looking at the article, this was actually published back in 2015 when it just happened. They said that they were able to, researchers from JAXA use microwaves to deliver 1.8 kilowatts of electricity with pinpoint accuracy to a receiver over a distance of 55 meters. So they were able to send it, 55 meters within our atmosphere using microwaves and send the power, but it is not from space to Earth.
Okay, thank you. That clears that up. Good.
Right.
Good.
So I completely understand. I think that the
Interesting.
Anthony Cuthbertson, I'm sure it's just a correction he needs to do, but they prove that obviously the principle is there and they can do it within our atmosphere.
Got it.
But to send something to space and have it beam back, that's something that Caltech did first. So
okay, thank you. That's very, very helpful. And I kind of had a little scratch on my head thinking. But I didn't pursue it, and I'm glad you did. Thank you. That clears that up. But anyway, no matter what, folks,
but still, it shows that all the technology, people are pursuing it, and they're all heading in the same direction.
Yes,
and it's working so far. It's totally viable. So just need to do it at scale. And of course, all the materials you were talking about also need to overcome putting these things into space. The incredible engineering that goes into kind of doing it. Ralph, not too long ago, there was a solar sail put into space that was going to go outside our solar system, and it was exciting to kind of follow NASA as they were like, the arms are extended, it takes a couple of hours for the arms to fully extend, but I don't remember which space probe that was, but seeing how complicated the equipment is, and as it kind of unfolds and assembles itself in space, I mean, it makes IKEA look like a joke. It's very, very cool. So story number two, definitely same vein. I see why you group them together. So story number two. Story number three, though, let's do a little, something a little different. And, my wife and I just recently, we just got a new mattress, and one of the key things is it had to sleep cool. Being able to, be cool. Everything has to be cooling. Sheets have to be cooling. Everything has to be cooling. Story number three, I think, should appeal to a lot of people because, you don't want to crank the AC up. You just want to feel, cool. So, hey, maybe number three might help you in that.
Yeah. Story number three is great because it's in the field of architecture technology, and I'll explain in a moment here. So the headline is New Cellulose Film Might Offer an Electricity-Free Air Conditioning Alternative. This iridescent film uses plant-based material to shed heat without warming the air. And we'll explain all of this. This comes from a wonderful website called extremetech.com, a story by Adriana 9. And again, we have an image of this film and so forth, and links for you in the show notes, and a video too. So here's the story. And Ben, we've talked about a lot of things about energy and related to buildings, special glass that can generate electricity and still you can look through it and all that. There's some great technology going on in the field of architecture and building. And this is a good example of an advancement that could be transformative. So Recently, scientists at the University of Cambridge reported the development of an eco-friendly, plant-based film that gets cooler when exposed to direct sunlight. And comes in a variety of textures and bright iridescent colors. Now, I wish I would get cooler if I were exposed to direct sunlight. That would be great. I do have the textures, but anyway.
There you go.
The material could someday keep buildings, cars, and other structures cool without requiring external power, aka electricity, right? This just blew my mind. The film uses passive daytime radiative cooling to shed heat without warming the surrounding air. Cellulose is one of just a few plant-based compounds capable of passive daytime radiative cooling. And there's in the show notes, I've got a side note here on the definition of cellulose and so forth and so on. I'm not going to read through that. You can come out to the show notes if you want to dive deeper and get geeky about cellulose. But let's go on with the story. The researchers extracted cellulose nanocrystals, or the acronym is CNCs, from wood and other plant sources, then dispersed the cellulose nanocrystals in water and allowed the suspension to evaporate. The evaporation process created a flexible arrangement of crystals that could then be applied over a white ethyl cellulose sheet to create a bi-layered iridescent film. I know that's a mouthful, and there's a side note I'm not going to torture you with on what is ethyl cellulose, because I had to find out. I got to know. And if you're like me, you can come to the show notes and find out more about that.
I feel like a white ethyl cellulose sheet is like a fancy way of saying a piece of paper, but no, it has to be something else.
Yeah, it's pretty geeky, and I got a link. There's actually a link in the show notes that explains it from ScienceDirect.com, so you can go geeky on this one.
Right.
But to go on here, it says the Cambridge researchers presented their experimental film at the American Chemical Society Spring 2023 meeting, so very recently. So when the team placed the film under direct sunlight, they found that it was roughly 7 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the surrounding air.
That's not nothing.
Yeah, that's just, and to your point about not nothing, here you go. A square meter of the film produced more than 120 watts of cooling power, nearly reproducing a residential air conditioner's cooling effects without using any external power sources. What?
That's incredible.
Wow. I know. I mean, this one, talk about a trend to watch. I love this. If the exterior of a building or vehicle was covered with this material, it could eliminate the need for conventional air conditioning. Now, that's really hard to wrap your head around, but I would love it if it were true. While some, and then, Ben, by the way, here's kind of a reality check, or not a reality check, it's sort of a comparative thing, because there's been other attempts to do this kind of technology. While some existing white and mirrored films produce similar cooling effects via passive daytime radiative cooling, their unattractive appearance limits usage. So let's be clear. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that, the only thing I can think of that people might recognize off the bat, and I'll have to double check this, but I'm assuming the traditional applications are sun visors. Think about the material and the color of the sun visors you put in your car. You don't exactly want to paint your house or your car in that reflective color,
There you go. Yeah, you're right on target. So again, let's be clear. This advance is not saying nobody else has ever come up with a material or treatment that does this property of taking direct sunlight and not heating up. That's not the point. The point is this: while some existing white and mirrored films produce similar cooling effects, via passive daytime radiative cooling, their unattractive appearance limits usage, especially for buildings and cars and so forth. Now, in contrast to that, the new Cambridge solution acts like a soap bubble. My grandkids, we have one of these automatic bubble machines outside, and it's just so interesting to see the light spectrum reflected in these bubbles, right? So the new Cambridge solution acts like a soap bubble. The surface of the cellulose film reflects visible light to create a colorful appearance without the use of any added pigment. And they stress this is crucial, as pigments would reduce the material's passive daytime radiative cooling capabilities. Now, here's where they think this may be attractive, may actually get deployed in the real world or for buildings and maybe vehicles too. The result is a pleasant prismatic effect that might lend well to aesthetic-focused real-world applications like residential and automotive design. It might also be possible to, and here's ding, 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 here's a good one. Check this out. It might also be possible to mimic wood finishes, drastically expanding the film's applications. And the team is working on that goal next. Wow, wait a minute, time out. If you could have this look like wood and have these properties, now you're talking. Because I think it'd be kind of psychedelic to have a house that looks like a soap bubble and with weird, cool colors, but other people might not.
Yeah, I could definitely see them being like a film on glass, because glass already has that kind of iridescent kind of sheen to it, and it wouldn't be too distracting on glass. And Ralph, I could even imagine places that you don't really kind of look too often, rooftop buildings, or I should say buildings rooftops. You don't really make direct eye contact with those often, but hey, if you're able to cool the house without doing that, all the better. So and luckily Cellulose is which you have in the side notes, it's not exactly the most uncommon thing in the world. Cellulose is, and I'm sure ethyl cellulose is a little bit different, but still, I'm sure it's very, very common. So it's not like an out of reach, like graphene, for instance. Something that we'll hopefully see in our lifetime. But no, this is very, very cool.
Isn't that fun? It's a great example of the trends that you and I get into every Friday.
For sure. It's really incredible. So story number 3, story number 4. And this should be a shout out to anyone who lives with chronic pain. I do not envy them. And it is, it's a problem. Story number 4 might help in, of course you can say, my knee hurts every single day. You can point to where it hurts. But I think being able to go into the brain where, let's face it, that's where pain kind of originates from. You may have sensors in your knees, but then of course it tells your brain this hurts. So pain, chronic pain, no matter where it is, happens in the brain. And that's why story number 4 could be very, very exciting for those having to deal with this day in and day out.
Yeah. And so a lot of times, not every Friday, but I'm such a fan of medical technology because it's personally impacted my life. Probably everybody listening in some way, shape, or form. But here's the headline, and this is really fun. Scientists decode brain waves linked to chronic pain. And it's may go, what? Okay. A new way to objectively measure chronic pain could lead to new treatments for common condition that can be very debilitating. And this comes from Smithsonian Magazine, a story by Margaret Osborne. And it may be a little confusing here at first, but we'll get into this and explain it in detail here. So a little setup here. Chronic pain is one of the most common conditions in the world. No surprise. In the United States, about 1 in 5 adults, or 50.2 million people experience chronic pain.
There's and I was gonna say, not to get too heavy with it, but there's a reason why the opioid epidemic kind of happened, and we went through that phase in medicine, Ralph. In the early 2000s, that was we have to manage pain because 1 in 5 adults, that's a lot of people, deal with pain day in and day out. So you can see why it was so important to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so chronic pain, of course, can persist for weeks, months, or years despite treatment. So it's a very, a challenging problem in medicine, right? And a terrible problem. But chronic pain is difficult to measure and treat. Doctors often rely on patients to self-report pain levels using a numeric or visual scale, which may not always be reliable, especially for children or adults who have difficulty communicating. Okay, I'm going to segue here for a moment, a little personal story. A few weeks ago, unfortunately, I experienced out of the blue a terrible abdominal pain. I mean, just awful, so bad. I wound up in the ER, and the doctor came in and she said, "Well, Ralph, on a scale from 1 to 10, where would you rate your pain?" It's so what? Well, sure, at the moment it was 10 plus.
Yeah.
But what does this mean? It's meaningless in a way, right? And so this story really resonated with me because we're on a path to have an objective. That's the key, an objective technical way of measuring pain. Okay, so that's what's so important. So now a team of scientists by the way, mine was ultimately diagnosed as a back nerve related thing that manifests itself as an abdominal pain. So now I'm under different physical therapy exercises. Anyway, I digress. Back to the story. Now, a team of scientists at the University of California, San Francisco has discovered a new way to ding, 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 objectively measure chronic pain by reading brain signals from a couple of volunteers. They say this research could eventually be used to create personalized therapies for those with severe pain, such as electrodes that can intercept the brain's pain signals and give a patient relief. So it's yeah.
I not to sound like a know-it-all. I went to college one time many years ago, and took Psych 101s, and I know everything. All I know is that a lot of psychology and the data that they pour through came from experiments that happened before ethics, I guess, was kind of, I don't want to say invented, but before ethics were rigorously and stringently applied to school like this, Ralph. I am curious how pain was inflicted on the volunteers for them to then read. Like, I don't know, maybe pinching, I guess. I'm just curious about that personally.
Well, you'll find out about these two volunteers in question. Good. So to continue on, to measure chronic pain, the researchers implanted electrodes in the brains of 4 volunteers, it was 4, who were experiencing pain after an amputation. So they took people who, they weren't inflicting anything. They took people who were having this, experiencing pain after an amputation, the famous phantom limb pain that we've maybe heard of, or they were stroke victims, okay? And as the participants went about their usual lives and days, the devices recorded activity in 2 brain regions where researchers think pain responses occur. And the 2 regions are the anterior cingulate cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex. Now, in my show notes, I have a couple of side notes. I did some research on the anterior cingulate cortex and the orbital frontal cortex. I won't plow through that. You can come to the show notes, get the links.
Ralph, everyone should know where these are. Everyone has a brain.
Oh,
they don't need it explained. No, but yeah, the diagrams are very helpful. Yes.
Yes. So you can check that out if you want to geek out on that, as I did myself. Okay. So several times a day for up to 6 months, the patients rated their pain levels on standard scales and then pressed a button that would cause the electrode implants to record their brain signals for 30 seconds. The research team then built machine learning models. Here's where AI is coming into this equation, okay? Artificial intelligence. So the team built machine learning models that could find patterns in the data to predict each patient's pain level based on signals in their brain. Next, the researchers wanted to compare these results with brain signals for short-term pain. So in the lab, they applied heat to the patient's bodies and recorded how their brains responded. Now that goes to your point about, did they pinch them? Did they poke them? They took
so they burned them with cigarettes. That's clearly what they did. They could do nothing else. No, that's a joke.
It's not that.
But yeah.
But they did do something to, induce discomfort. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. And they found...
they're just undergraduates. Who cares?
And here's the cool part about it. They found that acute pain was more associated with the anterior cingulate cortex, providing the first direct evidence that chronic pain and acute pain involve different areas of the brain. This is the key finding. Again, I want to stress this. They found that the chronic pain and acute pain involve different areas of the brain. This is a major finding. While this research might eventually help doctors find new targets for treatment and assess treatment responses, so far, data has only been collected on 4 participants, and all of them had chronic pain caused by nerve damage. But the research team is now trying to treat chronic pain by using mild electric currents near the electrodes that are implanted in the brain, and they hope to eventually expand their study to 20 or 30 people. So I want to stress, when we talk about trends and so forth, this is a great example. This is very, very early research with a glimmer of tremendous hope. Well, more than a glimmer, a beacon of hope, I think. And we'll see how this progresses, but a great way to end the show today with a very upbeat and hopeful medical technology breakthrough.
I think as important, and obviously there's going to be teams working on both, Ralph, that, just like last week we covered that story about a gentleman who was able to walk, after being paralyzed and able to essentially make that jump in the break in his spine with his spinal cord. And, that's all, that's incredible. People still work on that. And, those who can't do things will be able to do them. But, 1 in 5 people in America alone experience chronic pain. To be able to help those that aren't, impaired, but are in constant distress, that is an equally honorable, I guess, kind of field of research to look into.
Absolutely.
So, it's, and hey, maybe one day just having, we have pacemakers for the heart, maybe pain pacers for the brain, and be able to mitigate those. No medication, no weird side effects, hopefully. And like you said, very early research, but very uplifting and very, very promising. So, Ralph, I got to say that was a lot of fun. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to find out more about stories 1 through 4, hey, you can check out computeramerica.com. We'll have the show notes up. And if you want to find out more about Ralph, we'll have a link to his site and all of his other stories that he does here. He helps us with our science and tech trends. And ladies and gentlemen, until next time, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Do something fun. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.